Hi friends, before I say another word, I want you to do something for me. Just close your eyes for a second. Go ahead. Close them. I want you to think about a moment, just one moment, where you felt completely, utterly, undeniably happy, not satisfied, not relieved, not just okay. I mean truly, deeply, fully happy. Where your chest felt light, where you forgot about your bills, your problems, your fears, your past, where everything, even for just a few seconds, felt right. Got it? Good. Now open your eyes and tell me honestly, when was that moment? Was it last week? Last year? Was it so long ago that you had to dig through years of memory just to find it? Was it when you were a child, running barefoot on grass, laughing at nothing, needing nothing, wanting nothing beyond that exact moment? Because here's what scares me, friends. Here's what breaks my heart a little. Most people in this world are living their entire lives chasing that feeling and never, ever catching it. They spend 40 years climbing a ladder only to realize when they reach the top that the ladder was leaning against the wrong. They say, I'll be happy when I get the job. Then they get the job and they say, I'll be happy when I get the promotion. They get the promotion. I'll be happy when I buy the house. They buy the house. I'll be happy when the kids are grown. The kids grow up. I'll be happy when I retire. Me tire. And then they retire and they sit in a chair and they look out a window and they realize, with a grief so quiet and so heavy that no one around them can even see it, that they spent their whole life waiting to live. That is the tragedy I'm here to talk about today. Not death, not failure. Not death, not failure. Not poverty, not heartbreak. The tragedy of waiting. The tragedy of putting your happiness on layaway, paying for it in installments of sacrifice and delay, and never ever going to pick it up. Because happiness, friends, real, deep, lasting happiness is not a destination you arrive at. It is not a reward you earn after enough suffering. It is not waiting for you at the finish line like some prize you get for being the most disciplined person in the room. Happiness is a journey, it is the road itself. It is every step, every stumble, every moment of beauty you either choose to see or choose to walk past with your head down. And today I want to walk that road with you. I want to take you through some of the most profound truths about what it means to be alive, to be human, to struggle, to love, to fail, to rise, and through all of it, to find that the thing you were always searching for was never somewhere else. It was always here, right here, in the mess and the beauty and the ordinary, extraordinary miracle of being alive. So let's walk, let's go. I grew up in a house where happiness was always somewhere else. My father, God rest his soul, was one of the hardest working men I've ever known in my entire life. He woke up before the sun. He came home after the moon was already up. He worked with his hands calloused and cracked, and he never complained. Not once, because in his mind, sacrifice now meant happiness later. Struggle today, peace tomorrow. He was a man who believed in deferred living. And I remember being maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, and my father would look at me with those tired eyes, those beautiful, exhausted, loving eyes, and he'd say, Son, one day when things are better, we'll take that trip. We'll do the things we want to do. One day, one day. Those two words, one day. Do you know how many lives have been built on the foundation of those two words, and how many of them collapsed under the weight of waiting? My father never took that trip. He worked until his body wouldn't let him work anymore. He gave everything he had to the future, and the future came and took what was left of him and gave him almost nothing back. Not because he was a bad man, not because he didn't deserve better, but because nobody ever told him. Nobody ever sat him down and said, the joy you are saving for later, it's available now, right now, in this moment, in this dinner table, in this child sitting across from you. The trip doesn't have to be to somewhere far away. The trip is right here. Nobody told him that. And I swore, I made a promise to myself as a kid who barely understood what promises meant, that I was going to figure out this thing, this happiness thing, I was going to understand it. Because I watched my father sacrifice joy for a future that wasn't promised, and I wanted to find another way. What I discovered took me decades. It cost me relationships, mistakes, broken dreams, and long, dark nights where I sat alone wondering if I had it completely wrong. But what I found on the other side of all that, I want to give to you today, every single bit of it. Here's the first thing I want you to understand. We have been lied to. I don't say that with anger. I say it with compassion because the people who taught us these lies were themselves lied to. It's a chain of inherited illusions passed down through generations like a family heirloom nobody stopped to question. The lie is this: happiness is a feeling you arrive at through achievement. You achieve enough, you accumulate enough, you become successful enough, and happiness shows up. Like a guest who was always on their way, who just needed the right conditions to finally arrive. But I want you to think about the most successful people you've ever seen. Not the ones in interviews pretending everything is wonderful. I mean the ones you actually know, the ones up close. The ones whose lives look perfect from the outside. Because you know what you find when you look close? You find that most of them are just as lost as everyone else. Just better dressed, just better at performing okay, just operating at a higher tax bracket with the same emptiness. And this isn't a criticism of success. Success is wonderful. Achievement is wonderful. Working hard and building something and creating a life of meaning and material comfort. All of that is beautiful. But none of it is the source. Success is a wonderful vehicle. But it was never supposed to be the destination. The ancient Stoic philosopher Seneca, a man who lived 2000 years ago and somehow understood the human condition better than most people alive today. He said something that stopped me cold the first time I read it. He said, Nus quam eki ubique estite. Everywhere is nowhere. The man who chases everything arrives at nothing. 2000 years ago. And we still haven't listened. Let me tell you about a woman named Sarah. Sarah was 32 years old, successful by every external measurement you can think of. She had the career. She had the apartment in the city. She had the relationship, the social circle, the Instagram feed that made strangers feel inadequate just looking at it. She was, by all appearances, winning at life. And she came to me. Not as a therapist, not as a coach, just as a fellow human being who was clearly not winning at something that mattered more. And she sat down and she looked at me and she said, I feel like I'm watching my own life from behind glass. Like I see everything happening, but I can't actually touch it. I'm not sad exactly. I'm just absent, like I'm not really there. Absent. What a word. Absent from your own life. Present in your schedule, but absent from your existence. And when I asked her when the last time was that she felt truly present, truly there, in her own body, in her own life, she thought about it for a very long time. And then she said, I was 17. I was on a road trip with my friends. We were lost somewhere in the countryside. We'd run out of phone battery. We had half a tank of gas and no plan, and we pulled over and we just sat on the hood of the car watching the sunset. And I remember thinking this exact thought. I never want this to feel like it's already over. She was 32. And the last time she was fully alive inside her own life was 15 years ago. On the hood of a car in the middle of nowhere with no phone, no plan, no agenda. Just being. And what had she done in those 15 years? She had optimized. She had achieved. She had planned and executed and delivered and performed. She had become, in every technical sense, a success. And she had, in every meaningful sense, disappeared from her own story. Friends, I'm not asking you to abandon ambition. I'm not asking you to quit your job and sit on a mountain. I am asking you to consider the possibility that you are doing exactly what Sarah did. You are sleepwalking through the most extraordinary gift ever given to a conscious creature because you believe the good part is coming later. The good part is now. The good part has always been now. Now let me push back on myself for a moment because I know what some of you are thinking. I know because I thought it too for years. You're thinking, that's easy to say. You don't know my life. You don't know what I'm dealing with. You don't know what I've been through. Telling me to be present and find joy in the journey sounds beautiful when everything is going well. But what about when everything is falling apart? What about when the journey feels like a punishment? What about grief? What about failure? What about those seasons of life that aren't journeys so much as they are long, brutal winters that you're just trying to survive? And to that I say, yes, I hear you. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that hard times are secretly wonderful if you just change your perspective. That would be dishonest, and it would be insulting, and it would be the kind of shallow positivity that makes people distrust motivation altogether. Hard times are hard. Full stop. Full stop. Grief is real. Failure is painful. Loneliness is devastating. Heartbreak can feel like a physical wound. There are seasons of life that are genuinely dark, genuinely difficult, and in those seasons, happiness, the light, floating kind, is not available. And that's okay. That's human. That's part of the journey too. But here's what I have learned. Through my own losses, through watching people I love break and rebuild, through years of sitting with hard truths. The people who come through their darkest seasons with their spirit intact are not the ones who pretended the darkness wasn't real. They are the ones who found something in the darkness that mattered. Something small sometimes, something quiet, a purpose, a person, a reason to take the next breath. And they held onto that thing like a rope in a flood. And they moved through the dark, not because it wasn't dark, but because they found a light small enough to hold in their hand. That is what I mean when I say happiness is a journey. I don't mean every moment will feel like joy. I mean that even in the hardest moments, there is something worth holding. Today, there is something that makes the next moment possible. And the act of finding that thing, of reaching for it, of refusing to surrender your capacity for meaning, even when life is at its most brutal. That is the journey. That is the happiness, not the feeling at the end, the reaching itself. I want to tell you about a man named Viktor Frankl. You may have heard his name. If you haven't, please, after today, find his book. It is called Man's Search for Meaning, and it is one of the most important things ever written down by a human being. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist in Vienna in the 1930s. He was developing a new approach to psychology, building a life, building a practice, building a future. And then the Nazis came, and Viktor Frankl, because he was Jewish, was sent to Auschwitz. One of the most horrific places that has ever existed on this planet. A place designed to strip human beings of everything. Their names, their dignity, their families, their futures, their bodies, their very sense of being a person. They took everything from Viktor Frankl. They killed his wife. They killed his parents. They took his manuscripts, the work of years, the physical record of his ideas. They gave him a number instead of a name. They put him in conditions that no human being should ever have to experience. And Viktor Frankl, in the middle of all of that, made a discovery. He discovered that even in a concentration camp, even in the most absolute loss of external freedom that a person can experience, there is one freedom that cannot be taken, cannot be legislated away, cannot be stripped by any power on earth. The freedom to choose your response. The freedom to decide what this means, the freedom to find, even here, even now, in this, something worth living for. He watched men die, not from the physical conditions, but from the loss of meaning. He watched men who had decided there was nothing left worth holding on to simply stop, simply let go. And he watched other men equally broken, equally starved, equally stripped, keep going. Because they had something, a person they wanted to see again, a book they still wanted to write, a child somewhere who needed them to survive. And Frankl wrote, after surviving, that life never stops asking us questions. It is we who must answer. And the answer is never in words. The answer is always in how we live. How we live, friends. Not how we plan to live when things are better. Not how we live when we arrive at the destination. How we live right now, in the actual circumstances of our actual lives, with the actual cards we have been dealt. That is the speech. That is the whole speech right there. But I'm going to keep going, because understanding something in your head and carrying it in your bones are two different things. And I want this to get into your bones today. Let me talk about something that nobody talks about enough, and that is the relationship between happiness and identity. Most of us, without ever consciously deciding to, have tied our sense of happiness to conditions that are outside our control. I will be happy when people respect me. I will be happy when I am loved. I will be happy when I am loved. I will be happy when I am secure. I will be happy when I am free of this particular pain or this particular circumstance. And what that means is that we have outsourced our happiness. We have handed the controls to something external. And then we wonder why we don't feel in control of how we feel. Now, here is something that took me a very long time to truly understand. And it sounds simple when I say it, but don't let the simplicity fool you. Because simple and easy are not the same thing. Happiness is not something you pursue. Happiness is something you practice. Say that again in your own head. Happiness is not something you pursue. It is something you practice. You do not go out and find happiness like you find your car keys. You practice happiness like you practice a musical instrument. You practice it imperfectly and inconsistently, and with a lot of frustration, and some days it sounds terrible, and some days it sounds beautiful. And the only way to get better is to keep showing up and putting your hands on the keys. And the practice, the actual practice, is made up of things that have nothing to do with your circumstances and everything to do with your choices. Small choices, daily choices, the choice to be grateful for what is already here. The choice to be present in this conversation, this meal, this sunset, this ordinary Tuesday. The choice to let go of the past that you cannot change and the future that you cannot control, and to inhabit, fully, completely, courageously inhabit the only moment you actually have, this moment. I know. You've heard be present 1,000 times. It's printed on coffee mugs. It's a hashtag. It has been so thoroughly commodified that it barely means anything anymore. But I want to bring you back to what it actually, practically means. Not as a concept, as a practice. Being present means you are eating your food and actually tasting it instead of scrolling through your phone. Being present means you are in a conversation with someone you love and you are actually hearing them, not formulating your response, not thinking about what you need to do tomorrow, not half listening while the other half of your mind is somewhere else, but actually completely hearing them. Being present means you are walking outside and you notice the color of the sky, and for a moment, just a moment, you let that be enough. These sound like tiny things. They are not tiny things. They are the entire thing. Because your life is not the big moment. Your life is the accumulation of these tiny moments, stacked one on top of another, day after day, year after year. And if you are absent from the tiny moments, waiting for the big ones, you will be absent from most of your life. I read a study once, and this one got to me, where researchers asked elderly people at the end of their lives what they regretted most. And here's what nobody expected. The number one regret was not the things they had done. It was the things they had not done, the conversations they hadn't had, the trips they hadn't taken, the words they hadn't said, the love they had held back for fear of being vulnerable, the risks they hadn't taken because they were waiting to feel more ready. Friends, I want you to hear this. You will never feel more ready than you do right now. Because readiness is not a feeling that comes before the action. Readiness is what you discover when you take the action. You do not feel ready and then leap. You leap and discover on the way down that you were ready all along. The perfect moment you are waiting for, it has not come. But this moment, this imperfect, unpredictable, unscripted moment right here, this is the only one that's ever been real. I want to shift now. Because we've been talking about presence and practice and mindset, and all of that is true, all of that is necessary. But I don't want to pretend that the journey to happiness is purely an internal one, because it isn't. It is also relational. It is also communal. It is built, in significant part, from the connections we make with other human beings. There is a landmark study from Harvard University, the longest running study of adult development in history, nearly 80 years, that tracked the lives of hundreds of men from very different backgrounds, checking in with them year after year, decade after decade, measuring every variable you can think of: income, health, career success, intelligence, diet, genetics. And after nearly 80 years of data, you know what the study found. You know the single greatest predictor of a long, happy, healthy, fulfilled life. Not money, not success, not even good health. The quality of your relationships, not the number, the quality, the depth, the realness of your connections with other people. Robert Waldinger, one of the directors of the study, summed it up in 3 sentences that I have never forgotten. He said the people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at 50 were the healthiest at 80. The people who were lonely died earlier. And loneliness, he said, is as toxic to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness, 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness. We live in a time when more people are connected online than ever before in human history. And we also live in a time when more people feel profoundly, devastatingly alone than ever before in human history. We have thousands of followers and no one to call at 2 in the morning. We have inboxes full of messages and hearts full of isolation. We have built incredible technology for connecting with everyone except the person sitting next to us. And if happiness is a journey, then the road is not walked alone. It has never been meant to be walked alone. The people you love are not a reward you will enjoy after you succeed. They are the road. They are the scenery. They are the reason the road is worth walking. The conversations, the laughter, the arguments you come back from. The moments of sitting in comfortable silence with someone who knows you fully and stays anyway. That is not the side effect of a happy life. That is the happy life. I want to tell you a story about two brothers. I'll call them Thomas and Michael because those aren't their real names, but the story is real. Thomas and Michael grew up together, as close as two brothers can be. But as adults, they took very different paths. Thomas went after success with everything he had. He was brilliant, driven, relentless. They built a company, then another one. He had a beautiful home, a prestigious reputation, everything the world recognizes as winning. But somewhere along the way, in all the building and achieving, he became unavailable. To his wife, to his kids, to his brother Michael, always working, always planning, always somewhere else mentally even when he was physically present. His relationships gradually hollowed out, not through any dramatic betrayal, just through 1,000 small absences. A missed birthday, a phone call cut short, a dinner where his eyes were on his phone instead of the people at the table. Michael took a different path, not unsuccessful. Michael had a good life by any reasonable measure, but he never chased the extraordinary. He stayed in the town where they grew up. He coached his kids' soccer teams. He had dinner with his parents every Sunday until they died. He knew his neighbors by name and they knew his. He had a small, deep, real life. And then Thomas had a health scare, something serious. And he lay in a hospital bed for a week. And for the first time in 20 years, he had nowhere to be and nothing to build and nothing to optimize. And he lay there and he looked at the ceiling and he thought about his life and he cried, not because he was dying, but because he realized he had been absent from everything that mattered and the years were not coming back. It was Michael who sat by his bed every single day of that week. Michael, who had been given less of his brother's time and attention and presence than any friend deserves. Michael, who still showed up. And Thomas told me with tears in his eyes, that lying in that hospital bed with his brother beside him was the first moment in 20 years that he had genuinely felt happy. Not accomplished, not successful, happy, successful, happy. Because he was in his actual life with an actual person who actually loved him and nothing between them except the truth. He said, I spent 20 years running towards something I couldn't name and happiness was sitting in a plastic chair next to my hospital bed the whole time. Friends, please don't wait for a hospital bed. Please don't wait for a crisis to give you permission to stop and feel your life. You don't need an emergency to justify presence. You don't need a near-death experience to start living. You need a decision, just a decision, made right now. That the life you are currently living, not the life you will have someday, but this life today, is worth your full attention. And I want to talk now about something that is one of the great thieves of happiness. One of the great invisible forces that keeps people trapped in the waiting room of their own existence. And that is the disease of comparison. Theodore Roosevelt, a man who was himself no stranger to ambition and achievement, said that comparison is the thief of joy. And he was right. Completely, devastatingly right. Comparison is not motivation. Comparison is a trap. Comparison is looking at someone else's highlight reel and comparing it to your behind the scenes. Comparison is measuring your insides against someone else's outside. And in the world we live in now, it has never been easier to compare. We carry in our pockets a device that delivers at any moment an infinite stream of other people's best moments, greatest achievements, most glamorous vacations, most beautiful relationships, most inspiring transformations, Everston. And our brains, which were evolved to compare ourselves to the 20 or 30 people in our immediate tribe, now compare us to millions, billions, an endless parade of people who seem to have figured out something we haven't. And it is making us miserable. Genuinely, measurably, scientifically measurably miserable. Study after study shows the correlation between heavy social media use and increased rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and reduced life satisfaction. We are drowning in other people's joy and can't access our own. Here is what I want you to hear. The person whose life you are envying right now, the one who seems to have it all together, who seems to have found the secret, they are also comparing themselves to someone. They are also sitting with their own private failures, their own 3 a.m. doubts, their own grief and inadequacy and fear. Everyone is fighting a battle you cannot see from the outside. Everyone. And the only comparison that matters, the only one that serves you, is the comparison between who you are today and who you were yesterday. Are you a little kinder, a little more honest, a little more present, a little more the person you are capable of being? That is the only race worth running. And conveniently, it is one where you cannot lose as long as you keep moving. But let me go deeper. Because I don't just want to talk about comparison. I want to talk about what drives comparison. And what drives comparison at its root is insecurity. And what drives insecurity at its root is the fear that who you are, just as you are right now, without the achievements, without the status, without the performance, is not enough. That fear, that one fear, it is the engine of so much human suffering. Because when you believe you are not enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not attractive enough, not interesting enough, not lovable enough, you spend your entire life trying to become enough. You perform, you achieve, you accumulate, you compete. You shrink in some rooms and overcompensate in others. You wear masks and play roles and manage impressions and exhaust yourself maintaining a version of yourself that you hope will finally be acceptable. And the tragedy is that even when you achieve everything you are chasing, even when the world hands you the proof that you are enough, it doesn't fix the internal wound. Because the wound is not about external circumstances. It never was. The wound is a story you are telling yourself about yourself. And no external achievement can rewrite an internal story. The only thing that rewrites that story is a choice. A radical, courageous, profoundly countercultural choice to believe. To actually believe, not to say that you are enough right now. Not when you fix this thing. Not when you earn this approval. Not when you achieve this goal. Right now, exactly as you are, with all your mess and contradiction and unfinishedness. Enough. That doesn't mean stop growing. Growth is one of the most beautiful things about being human. Always be growing. Always be learning. Always be reaching. But reach from a place of wholeness, not from a place of lack. Grow because growth is joyful, not because you are trying to finally become acceptable. There is a difference in that energy that changes everything. Absolutely everything. Brené Brown, one of the bravest researchers I know of on the topic of human vulnerability, spent years studying what makes people live what she calls wholehearted life. And what she found across thousands of interviews was that the people who lived with the greatest joy, the greatest connection, the greatest sense of meaning, they all shared one thing. Not wealth, not talent, not perfect circumstances. Courage. The courage to be imperfect. The courage to be seen, truly seen, without guarantees of acceptance. The courage to love without certainty of love in return. The courage to show up fully in a world that very rarely tells you that being fully yourself is enough. Courage, not the absence of fear, not the absence of doubt, but the decision to move forward in spite of both. And I want to stay here for a moment because this is important. Joy, real joy, the kind that sustains you, is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the willingness to be vulnerable. Because the same walls you build to protect yourself from pain also keep out love. The same defenses that protect you from rejection also prevent you from connection. You cannot selectively numb the painful emotions and keep the joyful ones. When you numb everything. And you end up safe and empty instead of vulnerable and alive. I remember a conversation I had with a man, I'll call him David, who had spent 30 years being the strongest person in every room he entered. He was the provider, the protector, the one everyone leaned on. He took enormous pride in his emotional self-sufficiency. He didn't need anyone. He could handle anything. He had built a fortress and he lived in it with great discipline. And then his wife left him. And she said, and this is what killed him. This is the part he couldn't get over. She said, I never felt close to you. I never felt like I actually knew you. I never felt like you actually needed. He'd spent 30 years being strong for her, and she had been lonely for 30 years inside their marriage because he wouldn't let her in. His strength, his beautiful, disciplined, hard-won strength, had become a wall between him and the love he was building the strength to protect. He came to me 6 months after the divorce and he said, how do I do this differently? And I said, you start by telling the truth about what you feel, about what you feel, about what you need, about what you're afraid of. To someone you trust, start small, just crack the door. And he looked at me like I'd asked him to jump off a building. Because for him, emotionally speaking, I had. But he did it. Slowly, painfully, awkwardly. He did it. And you know what he found on the other side of the wall? He found connection. He found relief. He found that the people in his life didn't think less of him for being human. They loved him more because they could finally actually see him. And he told me about a year later, with a lightness in his voice that I had never heard there before. He said, I've been alive for 61 years and I don't think I've ever been this happy. 61 years. He had spent 61 years waiting for the right conditions, and it turned out the only condition that needed to change was his willingness to be seen. Friends, please hear this. Your vulnerability is not your weakness. It is your bridge to everything that matters. Now, I want to talk about failure. Because no speech about happiness and the journey is complete without an honest, unflinching look at failure. Because failure is not the opposite of the journey. Failure is part of the journey. Failure is actually, I'll say something that sounds crazy and I want you to stay with me. Failure is one of the most reliable signs that you are on the right path. Let me say that differently. The people who never fail are the people who never try anything hard enough to risk failing. And a life without risk is not a life that ever discovers what it was capable of. I want to talk about J.K. Rowling for a moment. Not the billionaire author you know today. I want to talk about J.K. Rowling at 30. Rowling at 30, recently divorced, unemployed, a single mother, clinically depressed, on welfare, trying to figure out how she was going to keep her child fed and warm. Writing a story about a boy wizard in cafes because she couldn't afford to heat her apartment and the cafes were warm. She wrote a book. She sent it to 12 publishers. 12 rejections. Not one publisher could see what she had. One of those publishers allegedly even told her not to quit her day job, which was a particularly cruel thing to say to a woman who didn't have a day job. 12 rejections. Most people stop at one. Most people stop before they even start because they're afraid of the rejection that hasn't happened yet. Rowling got rejected 12 times and kept going. And the 13th, a small publisher whose 8-year-old daughter grabbed the manuscript and refused to put it down, said yes. And the rest, as they say, is history. Harry Potter, one of the most beloved stories ever told. Hundreds of millions of books, generations of children who fell in love with reading because of a story a depressed, broke, single mother wrote in a warm cafe with nothing to lose. Or think about Thomas Edison. The man who invented the light bulb failed, by his own estimate, more than 10,000 times before he made one that worked. 10,000 times. And when a reporter asked him how it felt to have failed 10,000 times, Edison said, and this is one of my favorite things ever said by a human being. He said, I have not failed 10,000 times. I have successfully found 10,000 ways that do not work. What a reframe. What a magnificent revolutionary reframe. Failure as information. Failure as data. Failure is the road itself, telling you which way to turn. Not the end of the journey. Not evidence that you shouldn't be on the journey. Just the road, doing what roads do, which is sometimes going uphill, and sometimes hitting dead ends, and sometimes being beautiful, and sometimes being brutal, and always being part of where you go. And here's something I know about every single person in this room, in this audience, watching this, wherever you are. You have failed. Maybe spectacularly. Maybe recently. Maybe in a way that still hurts when you press on it. Maybe in a way you haven't told anyone about because you're not sure you've forgiven yourself yet. And I want to say to you with as much love and directness as I can put into words, your failure is not your identity. Your failure is not your identity. Your failure is not your future. Your failure is your education. And some of the most expensive, most important lessons you will ever learn were delivered through your worst moments. Don't waste them by just recovering. Recover. Yes, absolutely heal, but also learn. Let the failure teach you something that success never could. Because success confirms your assumptions, failure challenges them. And it is the challenged assumptions that lead to the breakthroughs. Now I want to talk about something that might be the most important thing I say today. And it's about time. Because at the root of the happiness as destination trap is a fundamental misunderstanding of how time works, or more precisely, how we experience time. Here is what I mean. We experience time in two ways. There is clock time, hours and minutes and seconds, the external, measurable, objective flow of time. And then there is what researchers call subjective time. the way time feels. And these two things are profoundly, dramatically different. An hour of boredom feels like 3. An hour of pure, engaged, absorbed joy feels like 5 minutes. A conversation that matters makes time disappear. A meeting that doesn't can stretch a single hour into what feels like theological time. And here is the critical insight. Most of us, most of the time, are living in clock time and almost never in subjective time. We are watching the hours pass, waiting for the right hour, the future hour, the hour when the destination arrives. And we miss the experience of time, the lived richness of it, almost entirely. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whose name I will not attempt to pronounce a second time, spent decades studying what he called flow states. Moments when people are so deeply engaged in what they are doing that they lose track of clock time entirely. Athletes call it being in the zone. Musicians call it being in the pocket. Writers call it when the words come, sure. And C6 in Mahale found that these flow states, these moments of complete, absorbed, fully present engagement, were the moments that people consistently rated as their happiest experiences. Not vacation, not receiving good news, not achievement, flow, presence. Being so deeply in what you are doing that the self disappears and only the doing remains. And what creates flow? A challenge that is just slightly beyond your current skill level. Enough that you have to reach, but not so much that you give up. Clear goals, immediate feedback, and complete distraction free engagement. Sound familiar? That is the journey. That is exactly what it feels like to be fully on a journey that matters. Stretched, engaged, reaching, alive, present, absorbed in the beautiful difficulty of becoming. That is not what it feels like to sit in the waiting room. That is not what it feels like to defer your living to a future date. That is what it feels like to show up every day to the work of your actual life. Friends, I want to take a few minutes now and talk about something that perhaps I've been circling around since the beginning of this speech. Something that I think is the deepest, truest, most fundamental truth about happiness that I know. And it is this: happiness at its core is not about how you feel, it is about who you are being. I know that's a strange sentence. Let me unpack it. When most people think about happiness, they think of it as a feeling, a warm, light, elevated emotional state. And feeling happy is wonderful. I am not dismissing it. But feelings are weather. They come and they go. They are influenced by 1,000 variables beyond your control. You cannot reliably manufacture the feeling of happiness on demand any more than you can manufacture sunshine. But who you are being, the values you are living, the person you are choosing to show up as, the integrity between what you believe and how you act, that is within your control. And there is a kind of deep, quiet, unshakable satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with your values. That is not a feeling, that is a state of being, and it is available in the darkest moments, not just the bright ones. When you act with kindness, you experience the rightness of kindness even if you don't feel good about it. When you tell the truth in a moment, lying would be easier. There is a quiet dignity in that choice that has nothing to do with how you feel. When you keep a commitment to yourself, when you say you will do something and you do it, not because anyone is watching, not because there is a reward, but because that is who you have decided to be. You build something inside yourself that no external circumstance can take away. Viktor Frankl again. In the concentration camp, the guards could take his name. They could take his possessions, his freedom, his wife, his future, but they could not take his choice of how to respond. And in that choice, that one tiny sovereign inviolable space between stimulus and response, he found a freedom that the barbed wire could not touch. That freedom, that is the source. Not the circumstances, not the circumstances, not the achievement, not the arrival, the choosing. Moment to moment in the only place you have ever actually lived, which is right here, right now. The choosing of who you are going to be. I want to talk about gratitude now. Because I cannot talk about happiness and not talk about gratitude. They are not separate things. Gratitude is not a response to happiness. Trust the path even when you cannot see where it leads. The journey asks you to be brave. Not constantly, not dramatically, but in the small, daily, ordinary moments where courage is required. The courage to say what you mean. The courage to love fully. The courage to try the thing that might not work. The courage to get back up after the thing that didn't work. The courage to be who you actually are in a world that is constantly suggesting you be someone more acceptable, more polished, more easily categorized. Be the unmistakable, unrepeatable, original thing that you are. The journey asks you to be patient, not with your goals. Chase those with everything you have. Patient with yourself, patient with the process, patient with the fact that transformation doesn't happen in a weekend or a month or even a year sometimes. It happens in the accumulated weight of 1,000 small decisions stacked up over time until one day you look in the mirror and you see someone different. Different. Someone who chose differently over and over until the choosing became nature. And the journey, friends, the journey rewards those who show up for it, not with a prize at the end, but with something better, with a life that was fully lived, with a self that was fully known, with relationships that were fully nurtured, with moments that were fully felt, with the irreplaceable, inimitable, once in a universe experience of being this specific extraordinary person in this specific extraordinary life, doing the beautiful, difficult, meaningful, ordinary, transcendent work of being alive. There is nothing else. There is no destination better than that. I want to end with a story, and I want you to really hear it. There was an old man who lived by the sea. He was 91 years old. He had lived a long life, full of joy and grief and ordinary days and extraordinary ones. He had loved and lost and built and broken and rebuilt and surprised himself over and over with what he was capable of. He had not always been happy, but he had always been present. He had always shown up. And a young woman came to him once. She was maybe 22, 23, and she sat with him on his porch by the sea. And she was in that particular anguish of early adulthood, where the future seems terrifying, and the present seems insufficient, and the past seems like a collection of mistakes. She was lost, the way young people are lost when they realize that nobody actually knows what they're doing, that there is no manual, that the certainty they were promised is not available. And she asked the old man, a little desperately, the way you ask someone who has survived long enough to maybe know. She said, "How do you find happiness? Where does it actually come from?" And the old man was quiet for a long time. He looked at the sea. He watched the light moving on the water. And then he said something she never forgot. He said, "Happiness isn't something you find, sweetheart. It's something you notice. It's been here the whole time. It's in the morning light on the water. It's in a cup of coffee that's exactly hot enough. It's in the way someone laughs when they're really surprised. It's in the feeling of your feet on the ground. It's in the few minutes before you fall asleep when your body just lets go. It's in every conversation where two people are really telling the truth. It's been here every day of your life, waiting for you to stop looking past it." She sat with that for a moment, and then she said, "But what about the hard days? What about grief? What about loss?" And he looked at her loss, and he looked at her with so much gentleness that she felt her throat tighten. He said, "Those are on the journey too, sweetheart. All of it is, you don't get to pick which miles you walk. You just get to decide whether you walk them with your eyes open or closed. And I've tried both. Open is better. Even when what you see breaks your heart. Even then. Because a broken heart is still a heart that was brave enough to love. And love, even love that costs you, is the whole point." She went home that evening with something shifted in her. Not fixed, not solved, shifted. Like a door that had been stuck for years had come loose on its hinge. And later, much later, she became someone who was known for her joy. Not her achievement, not her success, though she had plenty of that too. Her joy, the way she was fully present with people. The way she laughed easily and grieved fully and lived without the armor that keeps so many people safe and small. And when people asked her where she had learned it, she always said the same thing. She said, "An old man by the sea told me to open my eyes. So I did." Friends, open your eyes. Not to some future version of your life. To this one. The one happening right now in all its imperfect, unrepeatable, irretrievable beauty. The job you are in right now with its frustrations and its small victories. The relationship you are in right now with its complications and its moments of grace. The body you are in right now with its limitations and its extraordinary capacity to feel. The city, the neighborhood, the home you are in right now, imperfect, familiar, yours. The people in your life right now, complicated, frustrating, irreplaceable. This is it. This is the whole thing, not a preview, not a waiting room, not a rehearsal for the life that begins when things are better. This is it And it is enough. It is more than it is extraordinary. And you have permission. You have more than permission. You have an invitation, the most important invitation you will ever receive, to stop waiting and start living. Happiness is not a destination you will one day arrive at. It is the journey you are already on. It is available to you in this breath, in this moment, in this ordinary miraculous Tuesday. Take it, not someday, not when, not after, no, not after, now, now. You have been on the road this whole time. You just forgot to look up and see where you were. Look up. The road is beautiful. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. Keep walking and enjoy every single step. Thank you.